Between the story and the clock, Mirza Waheed. When we talk about time, we describe it as grandparents of grandparents. This connection is strong. It is in the weaving and in the landscape all around us. The old knowledge is better. The textiles are stronger, the colors don't fade. Just as we hope the memory of our ancestors doesn't fade either. Nilda Alvarez, indigenous Peruvian weaver and author. In my childhood, my uncle once brought a watch for me from Delhi. It was a Casio electronic watch. Things weren't yet called digital, with an LCD screen and a soft plastic wrist strap. It was sleek and stylish, and something of a novelty. Until then, my idea of a watch had been the heavy, manacle like Seiko my father wore, or the slim, gold plated, feminine watches that some younger aunts owned. I remember being hypnotized by the fast moving digits, the seconds changing like those on the countdown screens I had seen in movies. I kept waiting to witness the hour digit turn the moment the minutes reached 60. Hitherto, the main markers of time for me had been the liberatory dong of the school bell, the subtle movement of the minute hand on the grandfather clock in our forever shaded sitting room. When I close my eyes and think back in time, I sometimes still catch the sonorous ring of its silver colored pendulum. The Casio was a turning point. Time raced differently now. It somehow felt more acute, quicker, imposing a kind of urgency on life. A new iteration of the appearance of time, it was atomized and pressing. But after some time, the initial thrill wore off, and I began to look less frequently at the charcoal grey integers, once again forgetting myself in the long, timeless hours of the playground, or in the twilight hour when we played hide and seek and prayed for it to stretch on and on. The experience of time had once again subsumed measurement of it. Of course, back then I had no idea that thinkers across the ages had grappled with the question of time and its passing, postulating this theory or that. I certainly had no clue about Einstein's relativity, the scientific quest for a unified theory of time and space time. What I did know, though, was that my maternal grandmother, Morge, measured time differently from everybody else. She'd wake up before dawn to pray, then set alight coals in the copper samovar and start working the large clay oven in the kitchen she presided over. To see the time, she simply looked at the peher, or phase of the day. It had very little to do with clocks, and everything with her experience of time. When my grandfather died, time for her and others turned into denominators such as 14 days since, the 40th, then the Vaharvar or death anniversary. At one level, time was neither solar nor lunar for my grandmother. Time was patriarchal. We don't simply measure time, we bear its imprint on our lives. Then we take in and consider the sum of its imprints. The 11th century polymath Muhammad al Biruni was fascinated by attempts at the accurate measurement of time, so much so that he dedicated a large part of his life to writing a book on chronography, the mapping of time. He did this by examining how major religions determined and counted down the time of their feasts and festivals. Al Biruni believed that to count, to enumerate, was fundamental to the nature of man. In the ages before and since Al Biruni, we have grappled with the idea of time in broadly two ways: through observation and empirical measurement, leading to a scientific view of time, tied inextricably with our conception of space, the circling of the earth in relation to the sun, the movement of the stars, the waning and waxing of the moon, and subjective, spiritual, or psychological views of time, how we perceive and grasp time in our minds, how we process it in our remembrance. These two broad strands may intersect and run parallel together, perhaps touching again at infinity, which it is, after all, the essence of time to evoke. While conceptualizations of time have been a focus of philosophical and scientific inquiry for millennia, the idea of time is equal, if not more, significance in storytelling. The essays and stories in this edition of Writer's Mosaic aim to explore and interrogate this aspect above all: time in narrative. What do we do with it in our stories? How do we write time? How do we tell it? And how do we perceive its passing? In the 19th century, it was the French philosopher Henri Bergson who made perhaps the most significant and provocative intervention in our understanding of time. Broadly, it was Bergson's argument that clock time was different from psychological time, that the passage of time as we experience it is inseparably linked to the past, to memory, to what has passed before. Bergson proposed that time can linger, stretch in our perception because we see it back and forth in conjunction with the past. What has passed before not only affects but also coexists with the present. In our impulse to tell a story, we are driven by memory, and at the same time, we also create and recreate memory in the present. Storytelling implicates all the points of view from which we may see time. Clock or historical time and psychological time can, as Bergson suggested, be present at once. And it's this idea of the all inclusiveness of time in literature, this complex flux, time as moment and history, that we find captivating. As a reader, I have always been fascinated by how writers play between clock time and what may be termed as story time. In the great Urdu writer Kuratlan Haidar's magnum opus, Aag Ka Darya or River of Fire, a civilization is seen through the passage of four characters through two millennia, centuries held in one frame, joining up to form one vision of humanity. In Virginia Woolf's Mrs. Dalloway, by contrast, we are shown entire lifetimes as we travel back and forth in time in the course of a single day. Scheherazade must freeze time each night through her storytelling to stave off death itself. Penelope in the Homeric Odyssey unspools at night what she's woven in the day in order to delay an event, the choosing of one of her suitors, to suspend time. Examples abound, countless, because in narrative literature we hold time in our hands even as we see it pass. In this sense, it could be said that stories unfolding from memory, both consist of and hold time. At least one of the seeds that germinated into this edition was a conversation I had with the writer's mosaic editor, Gabriel Bardamosi, about the treatment of the long scene in novelist Nadim Aslam's work. Aslam excavates layer upon layer of a place and its time to reveal texture upon texture of his characters' past and present, indeed their whole making, the culmination often leaving the reader breathless. Aslam populates his scenes with relentlessly beautiful detail, so that the landscapes that the characters inhabit grow and surround us. There is no escape then from what follows, often an unexpected reveal or a tragic turn of events. In Aslam's fiction, the reader is attached to and immersed in the moment, held in place. I have in mind the recumbent Buddha statue scene in The Wasted Vigil, a novel about the brutality of modern day Afghanistan, told with such intense beauty that it slows down time itself. To read it is to linger in its unfolding quality. As a writer of fiction, I have naturally been interested in how other writers treat narrative time, how they inhabit multiple times, often simultaneously in their work, and how time is conceptualized both as narrative flow and as the passage of the characters' lives. In his meditative piece on time and memory, British Sudanese writer Jamal Mahjoub delves into cultural time as different from calendar time. The long, unchanging afternoons in the summer heat of Khartoum allow a young Mahjoub an escape as the world of his parents disappears into daytime sleep. At the siesta time, he transfers into the forbidden world of older children and the world of his parents' bookshelves that he reads voraciously. Later in his life, writing allows Mahjoub to recreate the timelessness of a culture where a siesta, Quite literally, a suspension of activity time is a daily ritual of stand stillness. British writer Kerry Hudson's piece is an exquisite record of time lived through the coronavirus pandemic in Prague, where tourists gravitate towards the clock in the city center and then do not because a deadly virus has arrived. Soon, Hudson begins to see time differently through her pregnancy. Heartbeats measured alongside a count of the growing number of neurons developing in her baby, 250,000 nerve cells per minute. Time becomes a deeply felt entity, linked more to her newborn child's breaths than the hands of the clock, which merely mark day and night. Her child marks out the whole of life. This brings me to concepts of spiritual time explored by Indian poet Tishani Doshi in her sweeping essay. Doshi considers time from the granular to the universal, from the breathy rhythms of the Drupad compositions she listens to as she settles down to write, to the occurrences of time across birth and death. In stories, time is not linear. It stretches into the past and bends towards the future. Stories give us the power to be both present and eternal. We have a chance to leap across the moment and the momentary. We are freed from TikTok, Doshi says. It's time travel through language. In his beautiful auto-fictional story, Pakistani short story writer and critic Amir Hussain shifts between time zones, recounting conversations and relationships, perhaps already altered by the onslaught of time. What he retrieves from lost time are inviolate moments of love, friendship, and beauty anchored in memory. Memory that feels immune to time's decay. Nikesh Shukla's story, a poignant fusion of memoir and fiction, dwells on what cannot be recovered. A beloved remembered across time, regrets chewed over, what might have been if only the narrator had seized his moment. The clock cannot be turned back. The only thing that can be reset is our humanity. Tamima Annam's astutely crafted story turns linear time on its head, her character confronting the idea of the path not taken. What kind of imagined life can one construct if allowed a fissure in time? It's a heartbreaking exploration of emotional attitudes to time and how we are programmed to measure our lives against time's restless onward flow. The closest we come to fully grasping time, therefore, is in our imaginations, not just as it is defined by the learned markers of days, nights, festivals, and so on, but because in our minds and bodies we can sense time in different ways: present, past, future, parallel, at multiple levels, all at the same time. Time in literature is forever, fluid. Books become vehicles for journeys across time and space, glimpses into places far from where we are located. Perhaps is the most fascinating of all the explorations of time. That moment or hour at bedtime when, drifting into sleep, we are transported into another universe as another Scheherazade spins story after story. Story time is in many ways the most complex version of time, enabling us to do what we can't do with real time. As though she describes its onset in her essay, when we are in the time of a story, we forget the time around us. I understand this to mean all variations of time, from universal time in its infinite vastness to the imperceptible lifespan of a subatomic particle. My grandmother translated time into chunks of moon time, Peshawar or fortnight, and so on. It is chronological time, no doubt, like the Gregorian calendar, but in my perception, perhaps because where I grew up it's more often cold than not, or perhaps because subliminally we associate grandmothers with shade, it is somehow cooler than sun time. Its tasir, or effect, is of shade. This is how I relate to time, in perpetual wonder.